Hello and welcome to another episode of Think About It with Osita Ifezwe. Thank you for tuning in. I have been wondering how we can make more academic research relatable to the ordinary audience to create public awareness that the everyday person understand what is going on behind the academic scene or even in organizations that work with a lot of data. And the reason for this thought is because I find that there is this gap between the academic community or even organization and how these informations are perceived by the ordinary person, the everyday person. There's this gap that somehow the information or the new findings or knowledge that is contained within the data is not really presented to the everyday person. So it got me wondering, how do we go about telling more data stories? How do we do data storytelling? And that's the whole essence of this episode, that we can understand how and why should we make data more palatable, more digestible for the everyday person? And I would start with this thought. I was at a conference last week presenting my academic research in the field of well-being. And something I've realized that is missing in my community, that is the community of immigrants that have lived in Finland or that are living in Finland, and the community that are researching on some of these issues around immigration, integration, and the question of belonging. And I see that there are quite a lot of research that is out there that somehow the everyday person probably don't know exist or cannot understand the information therein. And this is where I started presenting. I was thinking about how do I go about presenting my research in a way that I could blend some of the academic findings and at the same time make it relatable to the everyday person, that they can understand what is the essence of that research. I started by talking about why I kind of ventured into this field of the well-being of immigrants in Finland. And I started with the story of the incident that I read in the newspaper of this Kenyan boy that committed suicide in Finland back in 2002 as a result of being overwhelmed by the situation of things. And that was what prompted me to start thinking because there's this, so to say, stereotype that Africans, no matter what they deal with, would not consider suicide as an option. But when there is a trend of, being overwhelmed and that being the answer that some of these individuals resorted to, it got me thinking, what really is in the underlying reason for such happenings? So as I ventured more into this field, I found that there has been a lot of research work done in this field, considering the challenges that immigrants face in integrating, the prevalence of socio-economic factors, and how they impact on the well-being of people of African descent or immigrants in general. And we see that there is quite a lot of information out there. But when I finished this seminar presentation, one of my colleagues talked to me that, hey, I think it is time that you start living the storytelling mindset and switch to the academic mindset, which is very relevant because in that community, you have to present the data, analyze it, and show your findings. In an academic setting, the structure already exists. And sometimes going outside that structure is usually frowned upon in that community. And somehow that information, that finding in that academic setting, somehow does not connect to the everyday person. And that was my goal there, that I could see ways to link the information to show why this is the reason why I started these studies or this research or the data around it. And I've talked about this in the past. We've been in situations where we get into presentations and within seconds we tune out because we cannot connect to the information that is being presented, or it is too logical for us to comprehend. The human emotion disconnects, and people who are not able to kind of grasp or reason along the line of logic or break down data, or if they are not familiar with that environment, kind of get lost in the process. So, how do we take these rigors in academics and make it palatable, digestible for people in their everyday settings? And this is where I make this analogy. Sometimes we have to break down solid food into small chunks that are palatable for a baby to consume. The same way, we have to find a way to make chunks of data in a way that when we present it, those that are listening would embrace what they are hearing. But now let's break it down step by step, because the idea of this episode is for us to see why we need to tell data storytelling, or why do we need to break information down to make everyone around us understand it. And this draws to the question, what is data? What is storytelling? And what is data storytelling? I put it this way: data is basically raw facts. It's probably numbers or observation. It's like what I would call a brick, individual bricks. And if we think about a building, what makes up a building is the placement of individual bricks that results to a foundation and eventually a building. In the same way, data are like bricks, individual bricks that when we start to piece together, break down, they turn to information. And this is where information comes in. Okay, information, I would say it's like when you think about raw ingredients, you see a tomato. Uh, when you chop that tomato down, that's like information. When you apply that tomato to a meal, in preparation of a meal, that becomes knowledge. So you see the process that it takes. Data is like a tomato, information is like a chopped tomato, and knowledge is like the tomato put into the meal that it makes it tasty. So when we think also how data is collected, it could be through observation of individuals and a cumulative of that information or accumulation of that information is what would kind of lead to the discovery of a new knowledge. It is raw. Data is raw. It needs to be refined. And that's where the process of turning it into information comes in. When we chop data down, when we analyze it, when we break down these observations and find a way to package it in a knowledge form that someone would consume and at the same time be enriched by the nutrients. So just dumping those bricks or those tomatoes on people, it doesn't actually make any sense. It doesn't add meaning to the information that we are presenting. So, how do we go about doing this? Say, for example, we're trying to highlight the amount of unemployment that exists in Finland around women. So, say we say by last year, the number of unemployed women rose by 8%. That's an information. We've collected the data. We got the 8%. We've made it a bit more like an information leading to on knowledge. But this doesn't really go far enough to help connect to the human emotion. And that is why when information is presented in this form, people hear it, but do they really comprehend what we are saying? Can they really relate to that information or the knowledge that we are giving out? But what if you say it like this? Last year, Fatima, a trained nurse and a mother of two, applied for over 40 jobs and got no interviews. She is one of the thousands of immigrant women in Finland who potentially are being overlooked. In fact, unemployment in this group rose by 8% last year. I'm sure you would connect to that information a lot more. There are facts, there is human emotion behind it because some of us might have been in that position where we applied for job in the past and we can immediately connect to the pain that that brings. We can relate to that information and we can understand why that number is actually a significant number that we should try to look for solutions around, given that the factors that people are missing opportunities and not being placed in jobs that they want. So this is where data storing really helps the individual digest. This is where we break that food into small chunks, making it easy for the baby, the everyday person to relate to information that we are presenting. So next time you are probably presenting, the question is, what story is this data telling? What knowledge is this data presenting? How can I make it a lot more easy for my audience to relate with? And this is where we really have to do a lot of work in learning the processes of data storytelling. We have to know how to break down that data, the information that we are giving, in a way that it relates to people. And this is very essential now more than ever. Why? Because we are in the age of digital transformation. A lot of things are happening so fast that we often don't find time to stop and digest information in the raw form or in the concrete form. We have to relate it to the side that we can understand the emotions behind it. We have to see ways that we can polish information, because if we don't do that, what happens is we lose opportunity to connect to the audience that we are trying to give that information. We don't move people or inspire people to action, because it's only when we connect information, knowledge, or data to the emotions of people that's what would lead to action. And this brings me to a very real life experience. For example, there's this data that this information that I came across in a report by Statistic Finland, which was 1 in 3 people of African descent in Finland are reported to have experienced discrimination in the healthcare sector. That is an information that was presented there. And yes, to people in the academic setting, this is very relevant. They can understand it. But for us to actually grasp the essence of the information behind, we probably need to make that statistics a lot more relatable. So how might we go about doing this, making it more relatable to the everyday audience? Let's think about this. Let's say Amara, who is a 28-year-old woman from Espoo, who speaks fluent Finnish and has a nursing degree and takes care of her elderly mother. A month ago, she visited a hospital and complaining that she has chest pain. The doctor didn't run test as he should, but just say, hey, it's probably an anxiety or something that you shouldn't worry about, and sent her home. Even though she knew she was dealing with something more, she couldn't actually get the doctor to do further tests. She felt invincible. Fast forward 3 months later, she discovered that she has a serious heart condition that has gone undetected for months. That is probably more concrete. We can connect to that information. And when we show that this is a trend, or Amara's story is not a unique story, but that she is just one in three persons that this same thing might happen to or have happened to, then the audience starts understanding what we are talking about and they can relate more to the information that is being presented. So we're not just dishing out numbers, we're not just dishing out statistics, but we are helping people understand really what is the information that lies behind. So it helps for us to present not just facts, not just logics, but actually to present information that kind of connect to the human emotion, that helps us not tune out in places where we are going to present that information in a way that people can connect. So we talk about this now. We've broken down information, we've broken down knowledge, we've broken down data. But how do we then make this a regular practice? How do we make it a theory? For example, if a company is trying to highlight the significant growth or scaling in their customer base in the last year, those beautiful slides where you have the charts, the trajectory of growth, the beautiful increase that happened in very colorful charts might actually to us seem very good, professional, and it's really highlighting the information that we want to bring out. But how about breaking that information into very understandable chunks for people to kind of connect more to? So, for example, if a company grew by 5,000 customers from 2024 to 2025, and they want to present that information to the audience to incite people to come be more customers, might they go about doing this? Yes, 5,000 persons or customers is a significant number, but when we think about that as a whole, it doesn't make sense to me as a person. It doesn't, I cannot relate to it in some ways. So instead of saying that, we can say, hey, Maria loved our product and she told her family about it. And through that referral, we were able to add about 50 customers behind her. And that trajectory is what we've experienced because through referrals like Maria's, we were able to grow to about 5,000 customers in the year 2025. That I can understand, that I can relate to, that I have seen because people have approached me before referring me to use a product, or I have also referred people to use a product. So it helps us understand the core message that we are trying to put out. And this is where it's really important that we always look for ways to say, hey, what is the story behind this? What is the story behind the data or information or knowledge that I'm trying to give? And when we look behind the scenes, we are definitely going to find informations that we can break down to transform our data into relatable stories. So instead of presenting chunks of numbers or being very logical, let's find a way to blend that information and at the same time the storytelling. What about when we are presenting our charts? Like I said, we'll probably want to show a chart of the growth trajectory that we've experienced. That could also be presented in a visually captivating way. So how can we go about doing this? Instead of using just chat, we want to find information or infographic that can help simplify complex matters. We want to use metaphors, we want to use analogies, we want to use props to showcase what we are trying to say, because these are the things that stick to the mind of our audience when we want to pass information to them. So we want to discuss further how clarity is important in this process. So the question we might be asking ourselves to be more clear as respect which direction we go is, what can we find from the data presented? What does it mean? That means what insight is behind it? Why does this matter? So when we think in this three aspects, we know, hey, we found the data, we have to break the data into insightful information, then we have to see how that information we present impacts the audience, move them to action. So when we have this clear channel, this clear process of breaking down data or information or knowledge, then we are able to relate more to our audience. So always ask, what is the message here? What action am I trying to inspire my people to move to or do? And for or to whom can this information be relevant? Why does it matter? So before we start doing that spreadsheet, before we start creating that chart, how can we find stories that helps us to present the information and remove noise in the process? How can we make it a human story? How can we move from being just chunk of information into something that we can relate? I will try as much as possible to send more information. I have a chart that I've developed about this that helps us develop or build the process of doing data storytelling. And at times when I run workshops around this, I've actually highlighted, depending on the industry where you are, we have to find a way to work around things that actually are relevant to that sector that we are in. So, for example, we are in the academic setting. Yes, we are presenting academic information to people. At the same time, how do we make academics a lot more human, kind of present their message in a way that it relates to humans? How can they practice the elements or know the rules of storytelling so that they know how to balance and merge this in order to have a more productive result? How can we help policymakers make decisions not only around chunks of information, but around information that they would want the everyday person to work on or to kind of be inspired to action? So, how do we make that happen? We want to see the 4 basic rules of storytelling. We want to think about how do we put a hook on our audience? And that goes by how do we get that initial attention of them? Like I mentioned earlier, we have been in slides where as quickly as we get started, we tune out. And that's a lot more today because the pressure of what we deal with is more than ever. Our brains are struggling with a lot more things. We are very burdened with a lot of information. And at the same time, we need to actually stop and process these informations so that we can be able to relate it to us, to ourselves, that they become more memorable. So having a good hook to grab and keep the attention of our audience is really important. How do we show the conflict? Because one element of storytelling is introducing conflict. We are all hooked on conflict. We are all, we get our attention high up when we see a twist or a conflict in a story. So, like the story I mentioned of Amara, who was after some time of visiting the doctor, got a more severe type of illness. That's the conflict. That gets attention. What happened there? Why did this happen? How can this happen? That's what happens in our brains when we hear stories like this. So when we think about how we introduce the hook, introduce the conflict, and then break it down. Okay, what information is here? What insight can I help my audience understand? And how can I then make them move to the direction that I want so that the message could then sink in and move them to action? This is very interesting and a very nice thing to do usually when we are presenting information, but it's not a process that we learn offhand just like that. It takes time, it takes energy for us to actually be able to see stories behind data and the information behind it. How do we then do that? I would be sharing more information in the coming days as respect how we can go about making data more relatable. And in my workshops, I've been able to develop a framework that actually helps individuals, organizations to find a way to incorporate informations and stories behind the data they are presenting and how to develop more knowledge around that. And when we find a way to master that process, when we get on stage, no matter in the setting, if it's in academic setting, in the organizational setting, then we start thinking more of our audience and how we can make our information more relatable to them. I would love to hear more from you as respect how you've used data storytelling either in your everyday work or in academic research, or how we can make it more relatable to our audience. So please, if you have any thoughts around this or any comment, do leave it in the comment section below, or try to engage, or either send us also an email to find out how we can go about telling your story about data storytelling. Thank you for listening again. It's been an exciting time, and until next week when we get back on this again, stay strong.